Today we've got a couple topics of interest. There always seems to be some kind of topic of interest out there. And I want to start off with a story that I saw this morning about a gang rape that occurred on Facebook Live. I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. So in Sweden, I think it was, this woman was gang raped by two Afghani refugees for 3 hours on Facebook Live. And it took 3 hours for somebody to finally say, hey, something bad is going on here, and call the police. The police actually apparently arrested them while they were still streaming on Facebook Live. So it's, what do you say about this? There's so much here. First of all, the idea that you're going to be raping somebody and then streaming it to Facebook is a bit odd to me. And so I think the first point that we have to make here is that criminals are not particularly smart people. They're just not. This idea of the criminal mastermind that you see in all these movies, it just doesn't happen. So there's that. But there's so much more wrong with this. First of all, this was two Afghani refugees. You can only imagine my surprise. Sweden's been turned into the rape capital of Europe as a result of these unvetted immigrants from places like Afghanistan and the Middle East. And once again, I'm sure the Swedes will not report this as what it actually is. They'll just simply say it was some sort of a, domestic altercation or whatever the hell they want to say to come up with this stuff to cover the fact that they know full well what's going on. So, how's that multiculturalism working out for you over there, Sweden? The things I want to talk about regarding this have to do with multiculturalism and a little bit about the whole idea of Facebook Live. So let's start with the multiculturalism. This idea really started to float, I want to say, around the 80s or 90s, probably just after the Cold War. And the idea was that in the rich tapestry of cultures, part of the left's plan for winning and staying in power is this idea of moral equivalency. Moral equivalency means that you cannot make a moral judgment about anyone or anything. So who are we to say that America's got a better culture than Afghanistan? They're both equal. They're both different. They're both equally beautiful. And so if that's true, then the more of these equally beautiful cultures that we can put together in one place, then the happier we'll be and the more prosperous and all the rest. I don't think that's working out all that well, to be honest with you. I don't. And the reason I think it's not working out so well is because I think the premise is faulty. There's no reason to believe this nonsense is what I was trying to say. It simply doesn't make sense. So let's start talking about this seriously. There are differences in cultures, and there are differences in peoples. There's differences in civilizations. There are civilizations and non-civilizations. All of this stuff is real. You may not have to like it, but it's real. If somebody asked me, do you think American culture is superior to Afghani culture or whatever other culture you want to mention, I would say yes, it is. I would say it is, and enormously so. Because you can do things in American culture that you can't do in Afghani culture, but you can do most of the things in Afghani culture that you couldn't do in America. The short form here is that we have come to the realization, some of us came to it a lot earlier than others, and a lot of the progressives haven't come to it yet. They're going to be dragged to the grave before they wake up to this. But these cultures are not equal, and they don't coexist, no matter what the bumper sticker says. And it's funny, if you've ever seen that coexist bumper sticker, funny how all the letters, the O exists, seem to get along just fine. It's the C that's causing all the problems. This is why people have to really have a serious conversation about Islamic immigration into their countries, into European countries, and into the United States. Now, the tough thing here is the obvious thing, and the tough thing is this. There are, without question, millions, well, hundreds of thousands anyway, in the U.S. of peaceful Muslims who are leading fully productive lives, and they're wonderful, and we get them trotted out all the time, and that's just great. But it genuinely is great. But when you look at Islam the fundamental tenets of Islam, you find that Islam is not only incompatible with Western values, it's antithetical to Western values. Antithetical. In the West, one of probably the single great Western invention and mental innovation is the idea that you can speak your mind, that you can say what you want to say. And in Islam, you are not allowed to do that. If you say certain things about the Prophet, then you're going to be, in some real trouble. And if you say certain things about the Prophet, you'll have your head cut off under Sharia. But that's what Islam says. It's not like Islam. It's not like there's this branch of Islam that these peoples adhere to and that nobody else does. It's just what it is. In America, certainly under our First Amendment, you have a right to whatever religion you like or no religion. In Islam, if you leave Islam, you're an apostate and you can and should be killed, and so on. To give you an idea of how foreign these cultures are, these two Afghani men raped this Swedish woman for 3 hours, and according to Sharia law, in order for rape to be prosecuted, in order for rape to be actually rape, you have to have 4 male witnesses. So unfortunately for this woman, at least in terms of Sharia, there were only 2 male witnesses, and those were the 2 guys doing the actual raping. I really do stop and just sit there in amazement at how obvious this stuff is and how dense some people are and how much of this is just being told what to believe despite the fact that we know it's not true. I remember realizing the magnitude of this problem when I saw a statistic several years ago that said that the number, you want to guess, what percentage of rapes were committed in next door Norway and Oslo over a 5-year period? What percentage of rapes in Oslo was committed by immigrants from these countries? And the answer, as it turned out, was 100%. 100% of them were caused by Islamic immigrants. They're taught, whether in their madrasas or when they get here, they're taught that Westerners are their spoils, that this is an invasion, and that these are their spoils. This is what they are entitled to since they got here. And in response to this, these Western governments in Europe are doing things like, I'm not making this up, they're putting up signs, basically, the same kind of signs that you see on the back of an airplane when we're dealing with, the emergency evacuation route. It's a very clean kind of a graphic, very easy to understand. And it basically says, don't rape children in a public swimming pool. It's against our cultural norms. As if these people don't know what they're doing. So what's really going on here? Well, what's really going on here is this. The elitists who continue to run places like Sweden and Germany, France looks like they're going to get a regime change, but all of these European elitists who live very secure lives far away from all of these immigrants are telling us that something isn't happening, and they are insisting that it isn't happening, and everybody in the world knows that it is happening. And this is why Britain leaves the EU and why the rest of the countries are going to leave it as well. You cannot just lie to people about this as much as you do forever and not have a revolution on your hands. It makes me wonder what these people are thinking. Now, as it turns out, there's a partial explanation for this. In fact, there's a full explanation for this. Socialism, when people talk about good socialism, because you can talk about socialism in Cuba and you can talk about socialism in Russia and in China and all the rest. But when people talk about good socialism, they talk about places like Sweden, where everybody has cradle-to-grave benefits and what a wonderful place it is. Well, the problem with Sweden and the problem with socialism is it's essentially a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid fraud. What that means is that this idea of socialist benefits can work if you have 2 situations going on. First of all, Sweden and Scandinavia in general don't have to pay for defense. They can spend the defense money on things like social programs, and they don't have to pay for defense because The United States pays for defense. And I know that Sweden has some token forces, and I'm sure they're very good. I want to say Sweden has something like 170 tanks or something like that. And just across the Baltic is Russia with something like, I want to say 25,000, 15,000 tanks, something like this. So Sweden's defense is paid for by the American taxpayer. So first of all, you don't get your socialism if you get a free ride, without getting the free ride on defense. That's number one. But the main reason that Swedish socialism and the rest of these socialist countries are an illusion is because, as I said, they're a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme, or a pyramid fraud, is where the first people in get paid by the second people that come in. And then new investors come in all the time and they pay the previous people. And so on and so on and so on. And so the further down the pyramid you go, the wider the base of it has to be, because they're supporting everybody above them and they want a return too. Now, if you come in on level 8, let's say, there'd better be a level 9, because if there's not a level 9, then you've lost all your money. You've paid all of your money to the levels 7 through 1 all the way above you, and there's no one paying you if you're the last person in. That's why it's fraud. This is what Bernie Madoff did. It's simple fraud. It's a very effective fraud, but it's basically illegal, immoral, and unsustainable. As long as new idiots are coming in on the bottom, the benefits go up to the top. Well, that's exactly what socialism is. Socialism is a Ponzi scheme. It's a pyramid fraud. What I mean by that is this. If you, for example, were to say 4 hardworking Swedes could probably do enough work to take care of themselves and also to take care of one elderly sick person from cradle to grave. 4 people might be able to take care of 1 person, but 1 person cannot take care of 4 people. 1 person cannot work hard enough to have 4 people retired and have that person basically be able to pay for their own life, plus keep 4 people in full cradle-to-grave benefits. That's what we're facing now. All of these socialist countries have birth rates that have been catastrophically declining. The population of Greece, I want to say, halves now. Every 50 years, there's half as many Greeks and so on. Italy, Spain, all of them. Very low birth rates. So here's the problem that the socialists have, and this is why you have gang rapes on Facebook in Sweden. In order to keep the socialist benefits that they've become so accustomed to and that have become part of their actual identity, in order to do that, they need new people at the base of this socialist pyramid. And they're not making enough new people. Sweden's not making enough Swedes in order to have a successful continuing socialist government. So what do? Instead of changing their benefits and cutting back on the spending and keeping Sweden Swedish, they decided, probably back starting in the 70s, I would think, they could realize what was happening to them demographically, and they decided, you know what, if we're not making enough Swedes, we have to import Swedes. And so they did. They imported foreign people and gave them Swedish citizenship, and that is what was going to keep the base of the socialist pyramid growing forever. Which, is, you could say, at least is a fine and noble idea, but it's just a little difficult to understand why you would do something like this, why you would not make the decision to simply cut back the benefits. So in any event, in the early 1970s or so, somewhere in there, they start bringing in all of these extra immigrants. And the first groups of immigrants actually worked pretty well. They were grateful to be there. They were grateful to be Swedes. They were relatively hardworking. They really wanted to be there. And for the first 20 or 30 years, it seemed to be working out relatively well. In France and Germany and Sweden and other places like that, they, of course, had a hard time convincing themselves that they were true Swedes, no matter what the government said. Here in America, if you become a U.S. citizen, raise your hand, and become a citizen of the United States, you are as American as anybody who got off the Mayflower. But back to Sweden. So you have this first generation of Swedes there, immigrants that are working relatively well. And their kids are not working very, very well. And then they realize that this economic pyramid's about to collapse, and so they bring in large numbers of immigrants and refugees. This is the entire theory about European socialism, is that, here it is in a nutshell, we need more people coming in at the bottom than we do at the top in order to keep our cradle-to-grave socialist benefits. Now, if we're not making enough people, we have to bring in our other people. And if these other people become Swedes or Brits or Frenchmen or Germans or whatever, then it works. And if they don't, then it doesn't. And it turns out it doesn't. These new immigrants, especially this last wave that started in 2015, these people are not are not immigrating to Sweden in order to work hard and to create a socialist life for themselves. They don't particularly care about the fact that many Swedes have been for generations paying into this thing. They want the benefits now. You can often see videos of these guys sitting there talking about, as like some of these recent refugees a year or two ago, quite openly saying, well, Germany's got better benefits than Sweden, but, you know, it may be like the climate, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's like they're shopping. They're shopping for these benefits. And if you come into Europe and you have 4 wives, then every one of those wives is a financial benefit for you. You get more money, and so on and so on and so on. So the short form is, in order to perpetuate their socialist utopias, which are unsustainable without a growing population, Europe made a decision to import the people that it wasn't producing itself. And these people now have become very, very, very different from Swedes and Brits and so on. I don't remember what the actual percentage was, but somebody did a breakdown of this and looked at immigration, Muslim immigration to countries and how the numbers cook out. And it turns out that somewhere around 5 or 6, 7% of Muslim population, they start demonstrating, they start testing the waters. And when you get around 10 or 15%, they start demanding things like Sharia law. I'd love to tell you I was making this up, and I'd love to tell you this weren't true, but it is true, and so we have to face it, and we have to deal with it. When you have to ask yourself this: if you're a Buddhist immigrant to either Europe or the United States, let's say the United States, just, well, most of us live here. If you're a Buddhist immigrant to America, or a Hindu immigrant to America, Confucian immigrant to America, an animist immigrant to America, Jewish immigrant, pick one, there's nothing about your religion that is at odds with the American political culture. There's nothing that your religion demands that American society cannot essentially allow. We had a little case of something on the borders here with Santeria, which is a kind of almost like a voodoo worship down in Miami, and they were finding all these dead goats in the Miami River. Every day they'd find these dead goats that had been sacrificed to Santeria, and that's getting a little bit on the edges. But if your religion basically says that the world belongs to you through conquest, if the Quran is an invasion manual that basically tells you how to treat slaves, how to treat women, how to beat women, what to do with homosexuals, which is kill them, and all the rest of it, if that's what your religion is calling for, and if your religion says that if you speak out against the prophet, you will be killed, and if the religion says if you leave the religion, you will be killed, then that is antithetical to Western societies. And that means that they have to make a choice. Muslim immigrants to the West have to make a choice. Are they going to live under Western laws and Western rules and become somewhat more lax Muslims? Or are they going to be strict Muslims and decide that they want Muslim values in these European countries? Now, obviously, most of them, this has to be said and has to be keep saying it, most of them make the decision to live under the rules of the United States or Sweden or whatever. But as the numbers grow, and as the younger people become more radicalized, and as the possibility of a Muslim America or a Muslim Sweden or a Muslim Britain becomes at least somehow visible on the horizon, that's extremely encouraging to these young people, and they get a lot more militant and a lot more belligerent, and they push harder. And the harder they push, the faster the West backs up, and the more apologizing the West does. And that tells them something else too. So when all this happens, you begin to see this gigantic cultural shift, which is happening in Sweden, and it's happening all throughout Europe. It's happening to a much smaller degree here in America. But the cultural shift is this. These immigrants, like these 2 Afghanis that raped this woman on Facebook Live for 3 hours, or like the Muslims who made up 100% of the rapes over a 5-year period in Oslo, Norway, and so on. These people can start to smell victory in the air. And as I said, the Quran being an invasion manual and a conquest manual, as it turns out, there are in fact Islamic codes and strictures of behavior and so on that explain how you colonize a country of unbelievers. And one of the ways you do it is you just populate them. So the whole thing is a catastrophe. And I'm not aware of multiculturalism working anywhere. If you the closest I've ever seen of like a two culture society that I've ever personally seen was Canada. And going to Canada or even flying on a Canadian airline is a time-consuming experience because you get to hear everything twice. You get to hear it in English and you get to hear it in French. All the streets have English signs and French signs. All of the billboards have English and French. Everything's in two languages. And somehow this is supposed to make society harmonic. It doesn't make society harmonic. It makes it a little schizophrenic. So in conclusion on this subject, I would say this. Europe has a death wish. I don't think there's any question about it. They have a death wish, and the death wish is born of what happened during World War II. The guilt that they experienced over the Nazis has just completely overwhelmed them. They just don't have the will to live. They're not making kids, and they're allowing these kind of travesties. At least the elites are. So they're going to have to make a decision, and they're going to have to make a decision pretty quickly. And the pattern of the last year or so has been that if they don't make a decision pretty quickly, the people will make a decision for them. These elitists who run, I know I use that word frequently, but it's the word. These people who make policy for immigration in Germany and Sweden and all the rest, they don't deal with these problems. These problems don't affect them. It doesn't affect them. It affects the people that live there. If Angela Merkel lets in a million refugees in 2015, she's not affected by this. It doesn't affect Angela Merkel's household or her neighborhood or the people she sees. But if you have a community of something like 125 Germans and you put 350, 400 Syrians into that same community, it affects those people quite a lot. And that's why elitists are such vile creatures. They tell you that you're doing good for people, but what they're really doing is they're just making themselves happy. So just the fact that it was on Facebook Live is scandalous, and it's a problem that's going to keep getting worse until they make up their minds about what to do about it. The other thing I just want to say briefly on this story before we move on quickly to the British story is this. Facebook Live and Facebook and things like that are amazing tools for democracy. I don't think, in fact, I'm positive, we would not have won that election in 2016. In fact, we very likely wouldn't win any other elections again. Or even have any sense of the country left if it wasn't for the internet. If you were to get nothing but the news from the mainstream media and no other alternative sources, you would be filled with hopelessness. So the internet is what has allowed the conservative signal to get out, and one of the first arguments I can remember making cogently on this particular subject went something like this. Every single society in the history of the world, certainly every major society, has gone through the same process of growth, slow growth, then moral decay, and then immediate collapse. On a historical time scale, the collapse is almost instantaneous. And the reason is because the elitists who eventually take over the republic or take over the country or whatever, Rome goes from being a republic run by citizens to being an empire run by inbred lunatics like Caligula. This happens again and again and again, and it's always the same pattern. It's always the fish rots from the head down, as my beautiful Russian fiancé would say. That's a Russian expression, and it's absolutely true. Hi, Natasha. So again and again and again, we've watched entire societies collapse historically. It happened to the Babylonians, it happened to the Assyrians, it happened to the Greeks, it happened to the Egyptians, it happened to the Romans, it happened to the French, it happened to the Spanish, it happened to Britain, and it's happening here. The people who run the country become so isolated from the people, and they're so prosperous and so secure that they assume that everything's fine. They open up the gates of the city at midnight, and in come the barbarians, and that's the end of that. But the people, the citizens, never get to that place. If you think of the history of civilizations, the civilization history has been a city is a civilization. A walled city is the civilization. Inside is the civilization. Inside the walls are medicine and poetry and science and music and all the rest. Outside the walls are savage, brutal people who want these things but do not want to work for them and cannot work for them. They're not capable and they don't have the emotional or the intellectual strength to actually make it, so they'll steal it. The fastest way, the easiest way to make $1,000 is to steal it. The second easiest way is to tax it. But the elitists assume that everything's going to be fine, and they let these barbarians in, and then that's the end of it. So the internet has allowed us to have common people speak to each other for the first time in history. First time in history, regular people on the wall with arrows and bows and spears and stuff ready to defend this civilization are able to talk to each other and not be demoralized by these leaders, these Denethors. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, I think is the most reprehensible character in the entire book is Denethor, the leader of this of Gondor, of this kingdom under siege, and who is a defeatist, who says our time is over. The best we can do now is go find a quiet place to die. These people are not just traitors to their society; they're the destroyers of their society. So Facebook Live is giving us a chance to get messages like this out, and it's a wonderful thing in that regard. It allows us to get the signal out. That's great. But there's a dark side to it, and seeing online rapes and online tortures. An actor committed suicide, I think yesterday or today, online, Facebook Live line. You're going to see more of this, and the dark aspect of what is actually an extremely strong pro-democracy tool is going to become more and more obvious as time goes on. We started late and had some technical problems, so we're not going to do a commercial for the membership at BillWhittle.com on the account of the fact that if we did a membership commercial for BillWhittle.com, we'd be able to hire better and more people, and we wouldn't have to have these kind of technical issues. But as you can see, the set is looking much finer, and I think the new cameras look much better, so we're improving every day, and we're proud of that. So very briefly, on Britain, just a minute or two on Britain, Donald Trump is going to make his first foreign summit meeting with the head of state. It's going to be Theresa May of Great Britain. She's going to be the one who Donald Trump is going to see first. I mentioned, I think yesterday, the importance of signals, the importance of optics, how important things appear. It may not actually be necessarily influential in the real world. What really matters in many cases is how does it look? Now, Barack Obama, let's talk about how things look. His first day in office, he signs an executive order to close Guantanamo Bay, and either the first or second day in office, he returns the bust of Winston Churchill to Great Britain. His father was enemy of Great Britain in Kenya. I think his grandfather may be tortured by the British. But if the first thing you do when you move in is give somebody their Tupperware back, that's a statement. That's a signal that you're sending. And the signal that Barack Obama sent was, we're no longer going to have alliances with people like Great Britain and Australia. We're going to ally ourselves with people like Iran and all the rest of these places. So when Donald Trump gets himself into the White House and the Oval Office and becomes president, and he announces that the first person that he's going to meet as a public leader is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, that's a signal. And it's a damn good signal, and it's a way overdue signal. What he's basically saying is, he is essentially saying the West is the West, and the West will be defended together, or we got to hang together, or we'll hang separately, right? The decision to meet with Great Britain first is a reestablishment of American commitment and American alliances with what's been called the Anglosphere. The United States, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, a few other countries, where these Western values are very, very strong. It's an incredibly optimistic sign for me that this country is heading onto a path of survival. And the British exit, the Brexit, which preceded Trump's election by about 6 months, was the first good news I'd had in 8 years of watching these progressives continue. The British people decided they weren't going to be governed by these unelected, mysterious outsiders who were bringing ruin on their country and inviting in the most awful, brutal people in the world. They decided they wanted to run their own country, and they took it back, so that was great. Donald Trump did the same thing for America. So the fact that the United States and Great Britain are talking to each other now, that there's going to be the first meeting, is a sign. It's a signal that Donald Trump is saying to the world that, yeah, things are changing, and they're changing back. We're going back to the best alliance that we've ever had in the world. The unique relationship between Great Britain and the United States goes goes back to the foundation of the United States, obviously. We've been enemies, fought each other for a number of occasions. The Revolutionary War, War of 1812, nearly came to war over the Civil War and a couple of other places. But since World War I, certainly, Great Britain and the United States have been shoulder-to-shoulder allies facing the most difficult, most horrific evils in the world. And Australia and Canada, both there punching well above their weight. So Donald Trump saying the first person I'm going to meet is from Great Britain is a reestablishment of that tie. I think Trump is going to be looking at Great Britain in a much more positive way, and precisely opposite the way that Barack Obama said, well, if Britain leaves the EU, they're going to get, we're going to move them to the back of the queue, I think is what he said, as far as trade and alliances and stuff goes. Donald Trump is basically saying, no, we're going to move them to the front of the queue because they're an independent nation and they've broken free from this nightmare that they were in of intellectual tyranny, and they are going to be great trading partners and great military allies. I was pleased as punch about it. I continue to be very, very impressed by Donald Trump. His approval numbers are getting higher every day. I think he's at 59% now, something like that. The actions he's been taking so far have been great. It almost seems to me as if that there are two people here. The one who appoints these incredible cabinet positions and makes these incredible, really, really good moves for the future of the country. And then there's the person that gets on Twitter and argues about whether illegal aliens stole the election from him. At this point, I think, like most Americans, I don't care anymore about the Trump peccadillos. I don't care anymore about the somewhat childish tweets. I just don't care. I think most of the American public doesn't care anymore. They knew that this guy was an unusual guy, and he was elected to do a job. And so far, the things that he's done as president, and especially leading up to the presidency from the election day to inauguration day, I think, on balance, have been terrific. Absolutely terrific. Absolutely first rate. And I think it's a really good sign for where this country is going to be heading, and heading soon. Well, that'll do it for Facebook Live today for Thursday, the 26th of January. Little rocky start here, but as I say, every day we get a little better. Hopefully we'll get that monitor back up there tomorrow and get this set a little more lit, and then we'll be happy campers waiting to go, sitting here with our deck of cards to pass the time. In any event, thank you as always for being with us. Thanks especially to our members at BillWhittle.com who make this program and other programs possible. Next week we'll do one more free week, I think, to let everybody see what we got here. And next week also we'll be previewing these We the People version 2.0 videos for young people on economic issues. We'll hopefully run one of those every segment during next week. So until tomorrow, I'm Bill Whittle for BillWhittle.com here at Bill Whittle Live. A lot of Bill Whittle around here. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you tomorrow.